So we're in chapter 20, Luke chapter 20, and this is our last Bible study, last session before Monday, Thursday. So there's about two chapters, 20 and 21, before we get to chapter 22, which is where we start the Monday, Thursday, Last Supper. And then we get into Good Friday and all of that. So we'll warn you ahead of time. We may not get through all of 20 and all of 21, but we're gonna make a good run at it. We're gonna try our best. But in chapter 20, so this past Sunday was Palm Sunday. We watched the entrance of Jesus into Jerusalem. One of the things that we did not mention at the very end of chapter 19, we'll actually start there, end of chapter 19, verse 45, a familiar story that one of the first things that Jesus does when he enters the city is he cleanses the temple. He drives out the money changers. And so verse 45, then he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling things there. And he said, "It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." Every day he was teaching in the temple. The chief priests, the scribes, and the leaders of the people kept looking for a way to kill him. But they did not find anything they could do, for the people were spellbound by what they heard. So that's the end of chapter 19. Spellbound. That's just I'm not. Does anyone else have a different translation? Hanging on every word. That's just a beautiful word picture. So I liked it. I love this story. Part of it is it's very forceful. It's not particularly the picture of Jesus that perhaps we're comfortable with. One of the things that, like the other Gospels, when you read in Matthew or Mark, each gospel writer has different details, and so again, you might be familiar with a different version. It's my guess that most people are probably more familiar with Matthew's version than any other version. But one of the gospels talks about the fact that Jesus sat down and he made a whip. He made a whip out of cords, and that's there's one thing about losing your temper and getting mad and going to do something out of anger. There's also this other scene where he's sitting there making a whip, okay? So if any of you have ever tried to braid something before, that takes a little bit of time. I remember when I was in Scouts, we had to make a belt. I remember for some reason we had to make this belt. And, I was not a good belt maker, and I did not make it to Eagle Scouts. Maybe it was because of my belt making skills, but man, you had to sit there, you had these three things of leather, and you had to tie them all together, and it didn't look good, and I had to untie it and go back. You just got to sort of see Jesus sort of sitting there. I'm about to go do something. He has a plan. It was not just sort of a fit of rage. He goes in there with a purpose. This is something that has been done before. There have been a number of prophets that have gone into the temple and done something similar to this. The temple had three sections to it. There was the inner section called the Holy of Holies. That was for the priest and the priest alone. On the high holy day, which is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, that would be the day that the high priest would enter into the Holy of Holies. The Ark of the Covenant would be there. There would be a sacrifice and a ceremony that goes along with that. There's another sort of holy court that was designed just for the priesthood, Jewish believers, things of that nature. And then there was a third court, and this is where Jesus is very upset. The third court was a Gentile court. It was a space set aside for Gentiles, non-Jews, and basically common folk to come in and worship. And you knew, you're allowed to go here, but you're not allowed to go here, or that kind of thing. So this section was sort of taken over. It was taken over by people who were selling things. John goes into great detail about how people were. What's interesting is Luke records very little of this. He just records the fact that it happened. John records it. He actually records it at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And, they're making note of, you had to bring a sacrifice. You had to bring either a lamb, a goat, or something along those lines. If you could not afford that, you had to bring two turtle doves, where we get that shows up in our Christmas. 2 turtle doves. But you had to bring something. And oftentimes people would get there. They would travel for days to get to Jerusalem. They brought their animal, their sacrifice. There would be these inspectors who would look at the sacrifice and would say, oh, no, this sacrifice isn't good. This isn't good. Okay. I'm sorry you came all this way. Did you bring another sacrifice? Like, no, we didn't bring another sacrifice. We brought this one. We thought this one was perfectly acceptable. No, this one's not going to work. But we do have, for your convenience, we do have we have some pre-authorized animals over here. For a small fee, we'll let you take one of the pre-authorized animals and you can go in. Often 3-4 times more than what the animal was worth, that kind of thing. But you were kind of stuck. I brought my whole family. We came all this way. We came from possibly hundreds of miles to do this thing. And then you were stuck. And so people complained about that bitterly. But that all was set up in that third court. And so when Jesus goes in, he is driving those folks out because he knows it's a racket. It was a money-making thing. And so he is just frustrated as all get out that he's watching all this. And of course, the chief priests, the scribes, and the leaders, they are trying to find a way to kill him. They're trying to find a way to kill him, obviously because of what he's teaching, but also there is a financial piece to this as well. The temple itself, this temple, there was so much money flowing into this one spot. It's hard to calculate. Every Jewish person sent money to the temple. Okay, so it's hard to fathom just the multiple millions, billions of dollars that were coming in, and for Jesus to sort of see this, you haven't you got enough? Okay, so I love baseball. Everybody loves baseball. I'm excited. Part of my summer plan is going to include going to some baseball games. I'm excited about that. What I'm not excited about is I'm going to spend ridiculous amounts of money for very poorly cooked hot dog and a very dry pretzel and a beverage and
If you go opening day, you won't get a hot dog.
If you go today?
If you go opening day, Good Friday is their opening day.
Is it really? Good Friday's opening
day? And they're not serving hot dogs because of Holy Week.
Because of Holy Week. Are they serving like fish dogs or?
They said there would be plenty of other food, but no hot dogs.
No hot dogs on Good Friday. That's interesting. Wow. That's fascinating. Yeah. Yeah, Sugardale usually has a big day. Don't they have like a big hot dog day? Okay. So it would almost be like this is a poor example. Jesus comes into what is it called? The Guardian. The stadium's still the same though, right? Whatever the name of the stadium is. So Jesus comes in and says, "I can't believe you're charging $8 for a 10-cent piece of meat and all that." So that's probably what's going on. That's what I'm going to do. I don't know if it might kick me out or whatnot, but I'll be on the evening news. Yes, the owners and the vendors will be trying to kill me as well. Okay. So one day now, we're in Holy Week, and so we assume all this stuff that happened in 19 that happens on Palm Sunday. So we're now into Monday of Holy Week, and again we have just left the scene where the temple is cleansed. Jesus comes in, he's being cheered, palm branches, coats on the ground, all that stuff, and so we're at the height. Very quickly, it's going to come down. It's going to come down very quickly. One day as he was teaching the people in the temple. Now it's interesting. Jesus cleanses the temple. My guess is, I was not out of spite. You don't want to say Jesus does it out of spite. But I can imagine that Jesus clears out the temple and the very next day goes and plops down right in the middle of the area that he cleaned out. This is where I'm going to sit today, and this is where I'm going to teach from. I could see that. That's the sort of rebel renegade thing. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to teach these folks, telling the good news. The chief priests and the scribes came with the elders and said to him, "Tell us, by what authority are you doing these things?" Like, listen, you come in here? Who let you in here? Who gave you authority to say these things? And they're trying to trap him. Okay? Everything from this point on, they're trying to get him to say something that he regrets, okay, or he missteps. One of the things, our culture, we love that. Not necessarily us, but my goodness, if one person says something wrong, now oh my good, you're put on the news, you're canceled, you're Twittered, you're all of a sudden you've stepped over the line, and you're not really sure now what you're supposed to say, what you're not supposed to say. Other people sort of decide they don't like your stuff. But that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get him to say something that they can sort of run back and say, "Ha ha! We heard him say this thing." He says, "Who is it who gave you this authority?" He answered, "I will also ask you a question, and you will tell me, did the baptism of John come from heaven, or was it of human origin?" They discussed it with one another, saying, "If we say from heaven," he will say, "why did you not believe him? But if we say of human origin, all the people will stone us, for they are convinced that John was a prophet." And they know it's a great question. It's an ingenious question. Where did John get his authority from? And the leaders knew. The leaders knew that they had power over the people, but that power is very tenuous. It's one thing. It's sort of like knowing you have a boss in the company, but the boss never comes down to the main floor. The boss never comes into the factory. The boss never comes and sees what the common worker is doing. The boss sort of they stay up there. They're the boss and they're still in charge, and they could fire you or hire you or whatever. But the boss don't really know what's all happening on the floor. And the chief priests, the Pharisees, they sort of know this. They sort of know we could tell the people what to do, but at some point, we could at any point, these folks could just start picking up rocks and throwing them at us. So they're very careful about it. And they said, they answered that they did not know where it came from. And then Jesus said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things." So he doesn't even give an answer. Doesn't even give an answer to their question, which is frustrating. So verse 9, he began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard and leased it to tenants and went to another country for a long time. When the season came, he sent a servant to the tenants in order that they might give him his share of the produce of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. Next, he sent another servant. That one also they beat and insulted and sent away empty-handed. And he sent still a third. This one also they wounded and threw out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Perhaps they will respect him." But when the tenants saw him, they discussed it among themselves and said, "This is the heir. Let us kill him, so that the inheritance may be ours." So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? Okay, it's a great question. And it really does, this sort of brings into focus a number of things. All of the parables sort of have an obvious response to them, but Jesus sort of he turns it. Again, he pulls the listener into the story. Everyone thinks, no, that's not how this works. If I find a rich man and I kill his son, I'm not going to get the son's inheritance. I mean, that's not. I'm going to go to jail. I'm gonna be killed myself. And you're listening to this story like, are they really that daft? Are they really that slow that they would think, we're gonna kick out servant, kick out servant, kick out servant, and then we're gonna kill his son, and then all of a sudden the inheritance is going to be ours? And they're all sort of amazed because at some point they realize how dumb this is, but they also realize this story is about us. This story is about us. So verse 16, he will come and destroy those tenants and give the vineyard to others. When they heard this, they said, heaven forbid. No, there's no way. There's no way God would do that. There's no way that God would take anything away from us and give it to somebody else. We're the chosen. We are God's people. We're the seed of Abraham. And Jesus is like, no. It can be given to somebody else. But he looked at them and said, what then does this text mean? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, and it will crush anyone on whom it falls. When the scribes and the chief priests realized that he had told this parable against them, they wanted to lay hands on him at that very hour, but they feared the people. Okay? This is a very tenuous situation. I mean, everyone's emotions are running high. Jesus knows exactly what he's doing. He is becoming very pointed. The parables, when you look at the parables earlier in the Gospel of Luke, there are times where you hear this parable and you're like, oh, what does this mean? Who are we talking about? You get to this parable like, no, we know exactly who you're talking about. Okay? And there's no hiding it. There's just no, it's so thinly veiled that they're getting upset. They're getting offended, and they want to take him right away. So they watched him and sent spies who pretended to be honest in order to trap him by what he said, so as to hand him over to the jurisdiction and authority of the governor. So they asked him, "Teacher, we know that you are right in what you say and teach, and you show deference to no one, but teach the way of God in accordance with truth." There's a word called schmarmy, or just, if you ever know somebody's just trying to butter you up, or, not in a nice way. They're just, really? I think about the Lion King, Scar. Remember Scar from the Lion King? Every time Scar sort of shows up, he's this, Mufasa is the big regal king, and he's big looking, and every time Scar shows up, he's just kind of squirrely, and it always turns dark, and you just sort of know everything he says. He's got sort of that weird fiendish British accent. I love British people. But a British accent on a villain, that's one of the most classic things you can see. And they're you just sort of know nothing you can say. And nothing they can say is to believe. So they're just sort of buttering him up. It says, the question is, teacher, or verse 22, is it lawful for us to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Oh man, he's there, and this one's a tough one. This one is hard to get out of, because if he says yes, you are supposed to pay taxes to Caesar, then they would immediately come out and say he supports Rome. He's not here to defend us from Rome. He's supporting Rome. That's what he's after. If he says no, you should not pay taxes to Caesar, then they're going to turn around and say the very opposite. He's speaking down on Rome. Let's go call Pilate. Go call Herod, somebody like that. Get them on the case for this. Verse 23, but he perceived their craftiness. Jesus is smart. Okay? Jesus perceived their craftiness and said to them, show me a denarius. Whose head and whose title does it bear? They said, the emperor's. He said to them, then give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. That's an ingenious answer. That is ingenious. Somehow he sort of splits the middle with this response. The thing that's sort of interesting, technically, if you were like super religious, super faithful, you should not have Roman money on you. Okay? There were some that would have said, nope, we're not using Roman money. Well, part of the contention was it had the face of the emperor on it. The other thing that was often found on the money, and this becomes an issue for early Christians, you would have the picture of the emperor, and you would have on the coin at some point you would have the word Kyrios Soter, and that is Lord and Savior. And it would be over the emperor. Okay? So think about your George Washington, and all of a sudden your George Washington doesn't say in God we trust, it says Lord and Savior. And it's basically referring to the face that is on this money, that is Lord and Savior. And so that was the huge contention. Every time you use this money, you were sort of complicit in this whole thing. You were okay with idolatry. Okay? And there's different lines. I mean, there's different lines. How far do you go? I mean, we are a church. We live in this country. If you don't like this leadership, you don't like that leadership. Are you gonna? Okay, I'm gonna quit this nation for 4 years until we elect somebody else, or what? There's people who do this. There's people like, okay, we're going to live off the grid. I'm not going to participate at all. We think of ourselves as believers, and then, any one of us go down the road, 45 minutes to Amish country, and you say, man, they're doing something. There's something way different. They've just opted out. They just say, we're not going to participate. We're not going to participate. And we kind of look at them interesting or weird, but, they're not staring at their phones all day, and they're not, doing stuff. So there's different lines for that. But basically, these guys should not, technically, they should not have had these coins in their pocket. Okay? And most likely, they're probably walking around denouncing others who have these coins in their pocket. Okay? So it would be like, you know what? I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, listen, all of you, these cell phones are, they're evil. Evil. Should not have cell phones. Okay? Cell phones are just going to deliver bad stuff to you. Oh, hold on. I'm sorry. My phone's ringing. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I miss this? Okay. That's sort of what is going on. That they have probably at times preached against the use of that. There would have been some that say sometimes they would have turned away people if you brought your offering in a Roman coin. Nope, can't use it. So there's hypocrisy here. He catches them in this moment. They don't even really realize it. And so, but Jesus is sort of able to thread the needles. Like, listen, pay taxes to Caesar. It's Caesar's. It's a tax. That's where you live. Give to God, which is God's. Don't make a big issue about that. And it's sort of an early separation of church and state, if you want to go that way. But he's more interested. He catches them in their hypocrisy. That's what they're trying to catch him with. They want to use what he says, and the very fact that he asks them, and he pulls out a coin right away. There's nothing to be said. You don't even really think about it. Okay. I used to love watching, Matlock and who's the other guy? Oh gosh, Perry Mason, Matlock. There was another one. Columbo. Oh yes, Columbo. Okay. Oh my goodness, those shows were amazing, and they did this all the time. Where Columbo, he just kind of looked bumbling and just did, like, this guy don't know where his both shoes are, and he is talking, and he sort of lures you in, and he knows you're the killer. And he is like, oh, okay, I got to ask you these questions, and they think they're slick, and they've answered the questions, and he's walking away, and he's, one more question. Do you happen to have a letter opener on you, or do you happen to have a handkerchief or something? And they'll pull out this thing, and that's the murder weapon, or that's the piece of evidence. Like, oh, where did you get this? And and like, oh gosh, how did this guy catch us? Okay, that's just what happened. Jesus said, hey, but by the way, we'll talk about this. Does anybody have a coin? Does anybody have a Roman coin? Oh yeah, we got one. We got one right here. Like, oh, that's interesting that you have that. So verse 26, and they were not able in the presence of the people to trap him by what he said, and being amazed by his answer, they became silent. They knew it. They knew. Oh, they knew as soon as he said it. As soon as he said it, they knew. Verse 27. This is an old pastor's joke, so I'm going to share it with you anyways. But in verse 27, some Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection. Okay? So there were a number of different religious groups. And the Pharisees were, they get a bad rap. If I call you a Pharisee, I'm probably not complimenting you. I'm probably insulting you. Okay? The Pharisees were sort of seen it many times in Jewish history. They were sort of the heroes. They were devout. They defended Jerusalem. They were seen as purists. That whole thing. They were sort of on top of it all. And why they sort of shift here in this story is a very interesting thing. There was another group that were the Pharisees. They believed in an afterlife. They believed in a heaven, a hell. They believed in righteous living and all that. The Sadducees, they did not believe in an afterlife. They didn't believe in any of it. They just said, this is your life. You get your life. You live here. You die here. That's kind of it. And the pastor joked that as always, they don't believe in heaven. That's why they're sad, you see. Okay. So I won't use that on Easter. Okay, but the Sadducees, those are the ones who say there's no resurrection. So they're interesting. And so Luke includes this detail just so you sort of know. This is the way that these guys are coming from, or the direction they come from. And ask them a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now, there were 7 brothers. The first married and died childless. Then the second. And then the third married her. And so, in the same way, all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. You know why she died? She had 7 husbands. Listen, how she made it to 7, who knows? Okay, so in the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. Okay, now this is interesting. I get a question like this every once in a while. This is sort of the typical, when people find out I'm a minister, perhaps you get this. People find out you're a believer. You'll get these questions. There's a term called myopic meandering, okay? And it's just sort of this weird scenario that people come up with. If there was a Catholic and he was standing in front of Mary, the Pope, or Jesus, which one would the Catholic person bow to? And that's always sort of this weird, like, who does a Catholic person worship, or who does a Catholic person put first, and all that. Like, first of all, that's a dumb question. That's just dumb. It's just a dumb question. They're going to bow to Jesus. Okay, but there was some who are like non-Catholic, like, oh no, they have their priorities out of line. Then you'll hear these other things. Okay, you're on a boat. On the boat, you have a philosopher who knows the cure for cancer. There is a teenage mother who is pregnant with a child, and there's a who else do we have? We have a famous basketball player. You have a soldier who served his country. You have all these people on a boat. You can only save 2 of them, But some of it's supposed to say, well, what happens? And the one I always get. Okay, there is a boy. He was born on an island. Okay, and never heard about Jesus and never heard about God. He lives on this island, dies on this island, and what's going to happen to the boy? Is he going to go to heaven or is he going to go to hell? Those are interesting questions. Okay, first, I think God is not in heaven going, oh my goodness, I have no idea. What are we going to do? Please, can somebody get a boat over to this child? I think God's going to handle all of those situations. But these are questions. These are impossible scenarios that people come up with, and part of it there's an agenda there. I don't want to talk to you about belief. I don't want to talk to you about faith. I don't want to talk to you about anything like that. So I'm going to come up with this weird question that you can't answer, and that allows me to feel kind of smug about myself and see how much you know about. That's what's happening to Jesus. He's just getting the impossible scenario question. And it's impossible for a reason. You can't answer it. I mean, it's, you're just not supposed to, you're not supposed to be able to answer it. So they give this question to Jesus, and it's a weird question because they're asking Jesus a question about the resurrection, and if you're paying attention, like, you guys don't even believe in the resurrection anyways. Why are you asking? What are you asking about? You're just trying to trap me in this weird thing. So finally, the woman also died. Just grace to the woman who had 7 husbands. My goodness. In the resurrection, therefore, and they kind of say this with a smugness too, like, in the resurrection, okay. Therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. Okay. Jesus said to them, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore, because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact the dead are raised, Moses himself shows, and the fact. So he answers this question first. He answers about marriage. First of all, we're not doing the whole marriage thing, okay? And that sounds weird, because part of me, like, I want to be with my wife. I want to be with my spouse and all of that. And it's just going to be different, okay? There is, the idea of marriage is a here and now thing. And even in his explanation, it's going to be an odd thing, okay? It's hard. It's probably hard for Jesus to explain it to all of us, because we kind of want heaven to just be a pretty glorified image of where we are now, okay? I want, in heaven, all the Detroit teams are winning, and there's titles everywhere. I mean, it's just all the stadiums are full, the hot dogs are cheap, it's kind of beyond that. It's going to be different. Now, we did that whole series on heaven last summer, but it's sort of like, I remember a guy sort of tried to explain this before. He was a father, and he was trying to explain to his son. He was a little 5-year-old boy, and he was trying to explain the idea of marriage to his son. And he just, hey, one day, you're going to get older, and when you're older, you're going to move out of mommy and daddy's house, and you're going to be at a new house with someone else. It's going to be your wife. You're going to get married, and you're going to have a family of your own. And the boy's kind of tracking this whole time. Right? He's tracking this whole thing, and he sort of thinks for a little bit. He says, "Can I still bring my Star Wars figures with me?" Okay. And there's no way the father can listen, bud, you're not really going to be thinking about that. You're going to be thinking about other things. You're going to be in a whole different frame of mind. I mean, it's just a whole different deal. And that's kind of how we think about heaven. Like, hey, when I get to heaven, am I still going to be able to bring my my stuff with me? You know, am I going to have all of my cool stuff with me? No, but that's not a negative thing. It's just going to be different. It's going to be very familiar. It's going to be very comfortable. It's going to be very joyous. But at the same time, what is your priority here is going to be very different. So that's his first answer. And what's interesting in verse 37, he sort of goes back into it. And he says, and the fact, he says, well, by the way, since you guys tried to catch me on something that you don't even believe in, I know what you're trying to do. Verse 37, and the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, when he speaks of the Lord as God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is God, not of the dead, but of the living. For to him all of them are alive. That's a great answer. You know, they say it all the time. You know, they're part of their prayer. Their prayer would be, you know, he is the God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. Jesus is saying he didn't used to be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He didn't in the past, you know, when they were alive. God does not cease to be the God of Abraham. God is still the God of Abraham. God is still the God of Isaac. He is still the God of Jacob. He is still the God of Moses. He is still the God of David. He's still the God. When someone passes away, God is still their God. I mean, God is still over. He's still God of them. And so in that saying, they're still alive. They're still alive. For him, for to him all of them are alive. Then some of the scribes answered, Teacher, you have spoken well, for they no longer dared to ask him another question. Then he said to them, and he's not done, so you guys keep coming and asking questions, that's fine. Now you're here, like now you're in the class, now you're stuck. You ask me a question, I'm gonna sort of retort a little bit. And this is what we call, this is rhetoric. I mean, this sounds like they're having this big debate, this big... I mean, they are trying to kill him, but this was common. If you were in the temple, if you were in a Greek temple or a Greek place of education, you would have this kind of stuff all the time. We're very afraid to debate people. The idea of actually having a marketplace of ideas and people can share their opinions. No one wants to share their opinions. The only place you can share your opinion now is on Facebook. That's the only time you can share your opinion. Okay, and if somebody comments the wrong way, you can shut it off or all of that. But in ancient times, this was part. You would have to develop a thought. You'd have to develop an argument. You'd have to have some supporting points. Okay, we are so proud of Taryn Allgood. She's on the speech and debate team. Has done extremely well. But that's part of that skill. It's a very lost skill. Take this topic, develop your argument. Try to figure out what the argument from the other side is so that you are well-versed on both sides. If you only know one side, it's probably not good. And be able to sort of think and reply. You listen to somebody say something, and there's a retort to that. So that's a lot of what's going on here. But then Jesus said to them, how can they say that the Messiah is David's son? So he's asking a question. The Messiah is a descendant of David. That's one of the things that we know from the Old Testament. The Messiah has to be a descendant of David. That way he can lay claim to the idea of being a king. The Messiah is, obviously a descendant of Abraham, a descendant of David. If you look at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, we went through that genealogy. There's two genealogies, the one in Matthew, the one in Luke. They both show on Mary and Joseph's side that he's a descendant of David on both sides. And he asks this ingenious question. He goes back to David, and he says, hey, how can they say that the Messiah is David's son? For David himself says in the book of Psalms, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. David thus calls him Lord. So how can he be his son? He's asking, this is an intriguing question. When he says the word Lord, who is he talking to? And because there's this whole idea in the Old Testament, what the people are struggling with, and we struggle with this idea too. We struggle with the idea of the Trinity. Okay? We declare one God. There is one God. The Lord our God is one. The Shema from Deuteronomy, the cornerstone of our belief. We don't believe in many gods. We believe in one God. When we talk about the Trinity, we talk about 3 in 1. We talk about the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. And that gets very confusing for people. It gets very confusing for me. Does God turn into Jesus? No, that's something called Marcionism. It was an early church father debate that went on. No, God is one God in 3 persons. It's the way that God shows up in our lives. Okay, that God presents himself in 3 ways. So, but in this verse, this is a very little obscure verse, and he's basically saying, who is God talking to? When he says, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand. Who is God talking about? And that sort of catches them. Wow, wait a minute. We've read that thing for centuries. What? Well, I guess there would have to be... It's not an angel. It's not Moses. Moses is a prophet, but he's not Lord. And the picture is that there is someone else. And that's where Jesus is sort of taking that, like, that's who I am. Okay? When the Lord says to my Lord, that's me. I'm claiming that place, that spot. And so David thus calls him Lord. So how can he be his son? And this is a mind-numbing thing. If I'm a descendant of David, but I was also in this story with David, like, how does that work? And I don't know how that works. And so Jesus is basically saying, hey, I didn't just show up 33 years ago. I've been here. I've been here for a very long time. In fact, I've been here from the beginning. So in verse 45, in the hearing of all the people, he said to the disciples, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation. Okay? So, once he sort of sets them straight, he said, beware of these guys. What's interesting, it was just sort of there was an elitist thing. And we still see this in our culture. If I'm more educated than you, or I'm smarter, I come from a better family, God forbid there's actually elitism in Louisville. Imagine there are some people who look down on others. Okay? That happens. But one of the things that the scribes had a certain amount of power. Most people didn't read. Most people did not read. 97% of the population was not literate or did not read. And so just the whole idea that you could read. And it was possible at this time, you could read everything that had ever been written. It was very possible. Like, you could have read everything that had ever been written. And so these guys sort of had a sort of air about them. They would get called for all kinds of things. They had the ultimate job security because they could work in the temple, Their main job, if you were a religious scribe, your job was to make copies of the text. I mean, to copy the scrolls, to preserve the scrolls, things like that. But you could be used for all kinds of things. If you had to write a letter, okay, there was actually this time where you had to send letters. Okay, y'all remember that? How many of you remember licking stamps and licking envelopes? Like, oh my God. Okay. So now they've done away with that. We hate for you to have the inconvenience of licking an envelope. We have this peeling stick now. You don't have to lick this stuff anymore. You can just put it right on. We knew that was a burden for everybody. They tried like flavored ones for a little bit. That didn't work for very long. But now with that, could you imagine every time you send a text message now, every time you send an email now, like mailing it, and then I'm going to wait for the response to come back. So, but this was their job. They wrote down everything. So anytime anybody had to do anything, the king, the religious officials, government officials, the scribe, you always needed a scribe. That was just sort of their job. The majority of the New Testament was written probably by scribes. I mean, that Luke was probably educated enough that he writes this himself. Mark was probably Peter's scribe. He was probably the servant or follower of Peter. So it's probably Mark that writes down his stuff. Paul has a scribe, but he probably has a scribe more for the fact that some suggest that he had an eyesight problem, that he couldn't see as well. So Paul was very educated. He had a command of probably 3 or 4 different languages. Could write it himself. And there are points in the New Testament where he would say, hey, I am writing this with my own hand. I just want to let you know that I am actually Paul writing this. But he would use a scribe. Even if you could write, these guys were trained to write fast. And so did anyone have to learn shorthand in school? Remember, can you still do it?
I use some words, yeah, when I write, like with or the.
Right.
When I write.
So shorthand, that's a fabulous skill.
I was in class, but I couldn't do it.
Oh, it's hard. Like, and you look at a page of shorthand, you're like, what? It looks like noodles. I mean, just what is that? Okay? But they could write, even if you could write, these that's all they did. They just wrote every day, and so they could do it faster, and they had a skill for doing that. But it sort of made them pious. If you were a religious scribe, they just sort of walk around. They love to be greeted with respect, and they're just not good. Oh man! All right, we are not going to get into chapter 21. I would say that is your homework to read chapter 21 before you get to chapter 22. And if you are coming to our Monday, Thursday service, or if you're watching us online on Monday, Thursday as well, this is where the story will pick up for us. We'll be at that point this coming Thursday. So, the whole chapter. Look at us. Very good. All right. Reach for the virtual hand of the person next to you. May the Lord watch between me and thee while we're absent one from the other. Amen.